All right, let's get into it. Today, we're looking at a company that's not only a bedrock of U.S. national security, but is also kind of quietly building the future of energy, medicine, and yeah, even space travel. This is BWX Technologies, and believe me, there's a really fascinating story hiding inside its stock ticker. And this is really the central question, isn't it? How can one company do all this? On one hand, you've got this super stable, almost secretive government contractor. And on the other, you have this, dynamic portfolio of high-tech growth ventures. If you're an investor, figuring out how these two completely different sides of the business work together, well, that's the key to the whole thing. And the best way to think about it is like a tale of two businesses. We're going to call them the fortress and the growth engine. One is this bastion of stability, and the other is basically funding the world of tomorrow. So here's the most important takeaway. When you're looking at BWX Technologies, you're not really looking at one company. You're looking at two, both operating under the same roof. And how they interact, especially on a financial level, is what makes this such a compelling story. So let's break it down. First up, let's talk about the Fortress. This is their government operations segment, and it's the foundation that everything else is built on. The phrase you have to know here is sole source supplier. Now, this isn't just a strong market position. We're talking about a government-sanctioned monopoly. For the nuclear heart of the entire U.S. Navy fleet, there is no plan B. It is only BWXT. I mean, you can't ask for a more powerful competitive advantage than that. And that advantage, what investors love to call a moat, is just ridiculously deep. I mean, think about it. You've got decades of proprietary top-secret technical knowledge, insane regulatory and security hurdles, and oh, by the way, you're building the literal power source for the nation's most advanced warships. For any potential competitor, the barrier to entry isn't just high, it's a sheer vertical wall. Okay, so that fortress generates a ton of steady, predictable cash. So what does the company do with all that money? Well, it uses it to fund the future. And that brings us to part two of the story, the commercial operations segment. And they're not just making one bet here, they're making three huge bets on some of the biggest trends out there. They're supplying components for the new age of nuclear power, they're in the incredibly high-growth field of nuclear medicine to fight cancer, and they're literally building the engines that could get us to Mars. Any one of these could be a massive market. Their strategy for something like small modular reactors is just so smart. Instead of trying to pick the one winning SMR design, BWX is positioning itself to be the supplier for all of them. It is the classic picks and shovels play you hear about from the gold rush. It doesn't really matter who finds the gold because you're the one selling the tools to everybody. Right, so the story is fantastic, but as an investor, you know the narrative has to be backed up by the numbers. So let's look at the financials and see exactly how the Fortress funds the growth engine. And the first number that jumps out is a big one, a $6 billion order backlog. Just think of that as revenue that's already locked in, guaranteed for the next few years. That kind of visibility is incredibly rare, and it just massively de-risks the company's immediate future. Now, if we slice up that backlog, you can see the whole story right here in the numbers. The Fortress, that's the government side, makes up almost 3/4 of all the orders. But look at this. The growth engine, the commercial side, is already pulling in over $1.5 billion in orders. That's a really significant and growing piece of the pie. Okay, so revenue visibility is great, but the real question, the one that really matters, is profit. Where is the actual cash being made? The answer to this is the key to their entire model. And here it is. Just look at that difference. The government fortress business is an absolute cash machine, running at a super high 22.6% profit margin. Meanwhile, the commercial growth engine is running at a much lower 9.2% margin. So here's the punchline. That high-margin, ultra-stable fortress is printing the cash that lets BWXT invest in and grow these lower-margin, but potentially much faster-growing new businesses. So, all this brings us to the central dilemma for anyone looking to invest in this company. You have to weigh the incredible stability of the fortress against the huge potential and, of course, the risks of the growth engine. So let's look at the two sides of the coin. The bulls are going to point to that impenetrable fortress, those massive growth markets, and the de-risked revenue from the backlog. But the bears, they're going to point to the huge risk of having basically one customer, the U.S. government. They'll talk about the execution risk on these super complex projects and the very real possibility that the big payoffs from things like SMRs and space, well, they might still be many, many years down the road. Which leaves us with this one last question to chew on. Is BWXT a stable, almost utility-like defense giant that you own for safety and dividends? Or is it more like a venture capital fund full of high-tech startups that you own for explosive growth? The answer, and really the challenge for any investor, is that it's both, at the exact same time. And that's what makes BWX Technologies such a unique and absolutely fascinating story to follow.